teenagers are having more sex at an earlier age.
Half of our school is all for the, yeah, let's do it right now, let's not wait for anything for the future.
I do know a few girls at school that do have babies, 14, 15, 16 years old.
I'm Steve Aubrey. Young people today are bombarded with conflicting messages about sex from their families, their peers, and especially the media. So what can parents do to help their teenagers make the right choices? Stay tuned as we explore human sexuality, the challenge of adolescence.
Lots of my friends have already had sex and they're going into 8th grade.
Temptations, peer pressures.
Me and a lot of boys think about one thing.
People have older friends or older brothers who like show you movies and stuff like that.
I have been asked once.
I wonder what she wants to do, you know?
They think that they get attention by saying that they're not virgins anymore.
He gets more exposed to stuff.
My friends, they just really into boys.
And he starts seeing it, and then it becomes like a pretty normal thing.
I think the pressures that young teenagers experience around sex is from within themselves, from peers and also from the media and the adult community. And so it can get pretty overwhelming.
Dr. Keith Olson is a Christian psychotherapist who teaches at Bethel Seminary in San Diego.
For very young teens, those who are just going through and past puberty and into their early, mid-high school years are experiencing some pretty strong sexual impulses, sexual urges. There are a number of changes that have taken place over the last 2 to 3 decades. One is that more teenagers are having more sex at an earlier age. Another one of the changes is that the gap between boys and girls is becoming much, much more narrow. It used to be that there was about a 20 to 30 percentage point difference at least between more adolescent boys having sex than girls, and now that is, I think, down to about 10 percentage points. It's really getting much narrower. Our, I think, overly sexualized culture presents some very unhealthy messages to our teenagers that erode their ability to make more mature decisions. One of those messages is that you should be sexually active. If you are a person who is going to be popular, who is going to have value, then you should be sexually active. And not only should you be sexually active, you should be good. You should be accomplished. You should be able to really attract the opposite sex, to not be able to hold themselves back from you. And that's the message that I think kids and adults are inundated with on a daily basis.
I think since we've been exposed to sex in the media like over and over, that most teens and adolescents don't really take a second thought.
They're going to see it on TV, they're going to see it in movies, they're going to see the passion and want to know and be involved in that.
I think there is a tremendous social permissiveness that says if it does feel good, then by all means do it. And in fact, it probably is going to be harmful for you if you hold yourself back from something that you want to do. There's this sense that we should do anything that we really want to do. Defining want to do as it would feel good rather than want to do in a much broader total personality perspective is this really what I want? Do I want the results? Do I want the long-term consequences?
I think the attitude is basically depends on where you come from. Like half of our school is all for the, yeah, let's do it right now, let's not wait for anything for the future, anything. And there's the other half that are like, well, I'm going to college, I'm gonna have a family, I'm gonna wait till I get married to do that kind of stuff.
I do know a few girls at school that do have babies, 14, 15, 16 years old.
I think we ought to have as our goal, one of our goals in child raising, is helping young people to have the strength to choose not to be sexually active until marriage.
Clearly, part of the answer lies in parents sharing their beliefs about sex with their kids early on. But getting teens to open up to parents about their concerns isn't always easy.
I don't think I go to my parents, just not because, I don't know really why, just kind of, you just don't talk to your parents about that kind of thing. It wasn't something ever really discussed, you know what I mean? But just, when it was brought up, and then we just dropped it.
I think I could, because my parents have been open with me and telling me everything since I was about like 8, and I've known everything since then, and so I think I could go to them and trust them to understand everything that I told them.
Patty Waterman is a health educator who is raising 4 daughters. She's found frank and open discussion about sex has worked to impart the values she wants her kids to adopt.
I tried to be very straightforward with them most of their life, talking about things and preparing them ahead of time, because I grew up in a generation where the parents didn't talk to you at all. You just experienced everything on your own pretty much. And so I thought it was very important that I talked to them starting at a young age.
Well, I used to think that the baby just comes out from the mom because she ate a lot.
My dad used to tell me that I came from a Cabbage Patch.
They tell me what not to do, and they know I'm probably going to do it.
My parents always like stutter.
My dad's kind of scared about that.
My mom hasn't really talked to me.
He thinks that
I could talk. It's my dad. He's too embarrassed about talking about it, about sex.
My heart really goes out to parents who have a deep love for their children and yet find themselves at a critical point when they see their young adolescent moving into a very, very intimate relationship and knowing that there is extremely strong sexual temptation, and yet there is not the relationship depth between them and their child to handle this kind of a critical issue. You can't just make it happen automatically. In a way, it's kind of too late to build that. On the other sense, you don't give up.
If your child does become sexually active, you want to get involved, you want to know, and you want to help. You don't want to cut the strings at that point. If you do, you're just going to chase them further away from your family and your values.
Parents who set a very firm and rigid, extreme guideline, like I think is rigid, say, you shouldn't kiss anyone that you're not planning on marrying, or some of those that I think are just really extreme. That presents to their teenager a rule that is so hard for them to hold that they can experience nothing but frustration. And very frankly, if they do hold to it, it holds them back from meaningful growth in learning how to relate with the opposite sex. And I think we do our kids harm. And we need to be supportive of the goal, of the value that's being expressed more than the specificity of the actual behavior involved. Now, I'm not saying we wink at premarital sexuality at all, but what I'm saying is let's put it in context. Jesus said to us that what's in our heart is more important than any specific behavior. So I think we want to carry that same message right to our kids. And we also are going to approach them with a spirit of grace in their striving to fulfill that goal. In the very same way that we want God to approach us in a spirit of grace in fulfilling our vows of marital fidelity and our other vows that we make.
My relationship with God has a lot to do with it. My mom has brought me up in the church ever since I could remember. I pray every night. I understand right from wrong, and I base a lot of my decisions on what God wants for me, and I also understand that He's forgiving if I do make a mistake.
I think we need to keep putting the good message out that full sexual bonding is meant for the marriage relationship and has a very deep spiritual, psychological, and physical meaning for marriage, and they need to hear that from us. They also need to see it modeled. They need to see it modeled from parents. They need to see it modeled by their single parents who are dating. They need to see it modeled by the parents of their friends, and that helps to make it real.
My role model would have to be my mom and my dad, because they made the respectful decision for themselves to save themselves for each other when they found each other later on in their life. So I'm gonna do the same thing till I found the right person.
It's not just a vow of having sex after you're married with that person, but it's also just continuing to stay monogamous with that person. And with my parents, if you see like the love that there is between two people, that's kind of like what you see and want for yourself to happen in the future.
Teenagers are getting conflicting signals from society and even school sex education courses when it comes to the morality of sex.
they would like tell us like, yeah, use a condom if you're gonna do it, and then or you just don't do it at all. And a lot of people were too immature to understand what they were really going for right there. So
I think that we're learning more from experience or from our friends and from the media, because after basically 9th grade, they don't really teach you more in school anymore.
Kent Peters is the Director of Social Ministry for the Catholic Diocese of San Diego.
I have a fear that our understanding of sexuality and the way we're allowing young people to be sexually educated is so perverse that they may never be able to understand and relish the beauty of sexuality within marriage. And there's this conflict between the church holding up the beauty of sex within marriage and what kids see on the streets. And it's almost a struggle of proper sex and distorted sex.
What an unbelievably horrible message we've given to kids. This is not just a physical act like animals. We are not dogs, cats, pigs, and cows. We choose. And sex for me and sex for you is more than a biological function.
Pam Stenzel is the Director of Straight Talk, an organization she founded to teach young people the facts and consequences of sexual activity before marriage.
It involves more than your body, it involves everything you are. And if you actually think that it's just sex and it's not a big deal, then you have not walked or seen the pain that I've seen.
I started just counseling in a crisis pregnancy center in Minneapolis and directing a center there. And I was just day after day hearing girls say to me, I didn't know. Pam, if somebody would have told me that this would have been the result of the choice I was making, I've made a different choice. No one told me. I began to ask these girls, what could we have said? I mean, is there something that someone might have been able to say to you that would have helped you? And I finally realized that there were so many teens out there making choices about sex, having no concept what the consequences are.
Every choice we make, every choice you make either builds your character or destroys it. You are basically a product. Who you are is a product of all of the choices that you have made. And that's why it is so important that we heed and pay attention to what it is we're choosing.
The main thing I want kids to understand is that I can't make the choice for them. I mean, and no one can. This is a choice they need to make. But I want them to understand that if they have sex outside of one permanent, monogamous, and monogamy does not mean one at a time, okay? One partner who's only been with you. Outside of the context of marriage, if you have sex outside of that, you'll pay. There's a cost. No one has ever had sex outside of that boundary and not paid. So the question that has to be asked is, what's the cost? The physical cost of sex outside of marriage is just way beyond anything I think even most of us understand. I mean, for years I had girls in my office for pregnancy tests. They're all nervous and scared. I walk in and look at this girl and say, test is negative. And she gets this look of relief, I'm off the hook, not pregnant, I'm fine. I have to look at her and say, wait a minute, have you been tested for syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, chlamydia, trichomonas, vulvodynia, arthritis, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HIV? I mean, this girl's looking at me like, I would need those tests? I just wanted a pregnancy test. Of course she would. Pregnant teens today are carrying on average 2.3 sexually transmitted diseases. Not one, not two, most of them 3 or more. And yet pregnancy was what they were worried about. I tell parents, if you would have graduated from high school in 1967, 1 in 32 of your classmates would have had a sexually transmitted disease. If you would have graduated with me in the dark ages of 1983, 1 in 18 of my classmates had a sexually transmitted disease. In 1995, it was 1 in 4. I mean, there's absolutely almost no way that a single person today could have multiple partners and not get some disease. We've got over 30 sexually transmitted diseases, 30% of them incurable.
I think that when we identify a child, either our own child or a child in school, a child in our youth group, who is really at high risk, and that means probably right at the verge of beginning to be sexually active with someone, I think it's irresponsible if we don't give them the means to protect themselves from sexual disease and from pregnancy. We don't want our goals of abstinence to stand in the way of common sense and to protect, but neither should we present them right out at the beginning as two options. Here, you choose. You can either be abstinent or you can be quote-unquote safe. And I say quote-unquote safe because that's just partial safety.
Obviously, the message, the media, much of the bureaucracy, the government has given students is, hey, you know, abstinence is a good thing. I mean, don't do it. But if you're going to, make sure you use a condom. And responsible people practice safe sex. Here's the problem. There is no such thing as safe sex. And we know that. And the government has even said, and National Institutes of Health and Department of Health and Human Services, okay, not safe sex. Then they go, safer. Well, safer than what? The only safe sex is a safe partner. Someone who's not infected, period. That's the only safe sex. And any message that doesn't clearly state that is untrue. It takes strong moral courage to say, you know what, I am not going to cross that line, and I'm going to put boundaries in my life to make sure I don't even get close to that line, so that I'm not putting myself in temptation's way. I mean, I've told kids, 1 Corinthians says this, that we're all tempted. Every one of us is tempted. We deal with it, and no one is without. But God will make a way of escape. The problem is this, is that we say, you know, God, please, I don't want to have sex before I'm married, you know, and then we sit in the backseat of someone's car for 2 hours. I mean, that's about as stupid as standing out on railroad tracks and saying, dear God, I don't want to get hit by this train. Stop the train. You know, get off the tracks.
I think we need to very strongly orient ourselves to the Bible. I mean, I believe the Bible is written through men, inspired by God, to give us just the basic principles of life and who we are and how we relate with each other best, how we relate to ourselves best, and how we relate to God. And since there are some very strong prescriptions about genital sex being reserved for the marriage relationship, I think we ought to take it seriously. And because it is difficult to do, is not a good reason not to teach it and not to try to live by it. It's difficult not to gossip, but that's in the Bible too. And I don't think we ought to take the prescriptions about sexual behavior any more lightly than that.
The miracle of grace is that Jesus came to die so that we don't have to pay the penalty. And that's when we fall, that there's a God who still loves us, and his love is not dependent on what we do, but on what he's already done for us, and that we can come to him and confess and be made new and start over. I think when I speak in public schools and I'm not allowed to bring in God, the hardest thing to ask me, how can you leave out? What's the hardest thing? The hardest thing to leave out is forgiveness. Is that they can be forgiven, they can start over, that God accepts and loves them and wants to give them the chance to start over.
But the truth is, for those that have experienced the beauty of sex within marriage and have understood that it is there not only to bring a couple closer together, but to create and perpetuate the human family, when that's understood and placed in its proper context, sex is an incredibly positive gift. And I know that Christian churches and churches of all denominations are really trying to lift that up for children and show them that when it's appropriate in in their teen years and maybe even in their preteen years.
God wants you to have great sex. And let me make you a promise. If you will honor him with your sexuality, he will give you your heart's desire beyond anything you could ever imagine.
I don't think we should ever give up that message of positive human sexuality. It's God-given. The pleasure in it is God-given. It's wonderful. And God designed it that way. And that set into the proper context of love and faithfulness and trust is a very powerful thing.
Just through going to church and the way I was brought up, I've decided for myself that I'm gonna wait until I'm married no matter what happens, because I feel that it's just more special and better to wait